We're glad to see that everyone here. We have C-SPAN taping this event. We will begin with a conversation. We have with us, first let me introduce myself. I'm Layla Halal. I'm directing the Middle East Task Force here. And we have with us today two distinguished guests. And we're very excited to have this conversation at such a timely period in Egypt's history, as we see from the news that it continues to face turmoil and upheaval. To my left is Rob Malley. He's currently the Middle East and North Africa Program Director at the International Crisis Group. He really probably needs no introduction for those of you here who are based in D.C. But prior to his tenure at the ICG, he was Special Assistant to President Clinton for Arab-Israeli Affairs, and he was the Executive Assistant to Samuel Berger at the as a National Security Advisor from 1996 to 1998. He is published widely. He is a leading analyst on Middle East affairs, and we're very glad to have him with us today. To my right is Ashraf Khalil, not from Washington, and a fresh voice for us in D.C. He is a Cairo-based journalist, and he's been covering the Middle East for 15 years. He was a correspondent with Los Angeles Times and covering Baghdad and Jerusalem, or based in both places. Mm-hmm. Yes, you were in Jerusalem. He has previously reported for the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy, and the Times of London, and The Economist as well. He is a blogger at the very popular The Arabist, which was founded by Sandra El-Amrani. So we are here largely at to launch Ashraf's new book. It was published just last month. We have copies outside. It's entitled Inside the Egyptian Revolution and the Rebirth of a Nation, Liberation Square, a very sort of emotive cover. This book has been received to quite critical acclaim. Salon noted that it was perfectly calibrated in its amount of background commentary and prognostication, and above all, a thrilling account. Publishers Week described it as an essential reading, evoking the urgency and vitality of the Arab Springs Egyptian chapter. And the Daily Beast noted that it paints a full canvas of the tools of domination built by Mubarak's police state. So we have copies of the book that will be arriving, and afterwards Ashraf is available to sign and chat with you further, as I think Rob has to leave immediately, but we will try to cover as much ground as we can in the discussion. Just to begin with you, Ashraf, your book sort of sweeps through 3 decades of Mubarak's rule before going into tracking the 18 days of revolt that toppled him. And then you close with some commentary on the key transitional challenges ahead, which are economic corruption, media freedom, and security reform. And what I think, with the developments in Egypt in the past 48 hours, there's clearly a very current conversation to have about Egypt, and I think events are changing quite quickly. But I think it's also important to keep track and to note what led up to this revolution. In your book, and just to note, you've been based in Cairo for
since 1997.
For 15 years, which means that you didn't just land in Cairo when on January 25th, 2011. So you obviously saw this lead up, and you describe in your book the increasing stranglehold of the regime, and then the agitation of people on the ground towards it. And I remember that as the Tunisian dictator fell, many said that Egypt would not. But in less than 3 weeks, Mubarak was gone. So was this a surprise to you?
There was a lot of, immediately after Tunisia, there was a lot of chatter in Egypt. I mean, the activist forces there were openly trying to figure out how to make the same thing happen, and trying to lay the groundwork for a similar uprising. But you heard so much, oh, that can't happen here. I remember talking to, on the 26th actually, the day after the start of the revolution, when you had these unprecedented numbers turning out and really taking the country into uncharted waters. I remember just getting in a cab and wanting to go to Tahrir, and having like the classic cynical cab driver who was basically like, oh no, we can't do what the Tunisians did. Tunisia is a civilized country. Even then, Egyptians did not believe that they could pull this off. And I think one of the stories of the Mubarak regime is that the people kind of lost faith in themselves. He really killed the sense of political engagement, and really sowed this feeling of helplessness in the people. I mean, as dictators go, he wasn't Saddam Hussein, he wasn't Hafez al-Assad, he wasn't Gaddafi. There will be no mass graves being unearthed in Egypt, but he really sort of killed their spirit. And it took a while, but I mean, people just lost faith in themselves. And so immediately before the revolution started, the Arab League had a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, an economic summit. And it was right after Tunisia and right before Egypt. And Egyptians were starting to set themselves on fire. You had that very disturbing little mini trend happening in Egypt. And all the Arab League delegates were all like, oh no, it's not possible. This is not Tunisia. Everybody had a reason why why the example could not be repeated. And the one guy who was off message, I give him credit for this, was Amr Moussa. From day one, he was there, and he was the head of the Arab League. He's supposed to be in lockstep with these guys. And I was shocked by the quotes I got from him. He was basically saying, no, this is a wake-up call. There's things that really need to change. This could spread. We have to be very careful. We have to sort of acknowledge that people will not be marginalized anymore. I remember the quote vividly. So,
right. But this sense of marginalization and this resistance to it certainly was not new. It wasn't a sense that people suddenly on January 25th or what was the date when Ben Ali fell?
2 weeks, almost exactly 2 weeks before, so about the 11th, maybe the 10th.
So it wasn't on that date that suddenly people realized that they have a grievance towards the regime, and it wasn't that either that they hadn't tried to express themselves. I mean, there were events leading up to the revolution that enabled it eventually to begin. I mean, you could say that Tunisia was a catalyst in the sense, but it wasn't the sole reason for the uprising in Egypt.
It certainly wasn't the sole reason. It wasn't the reason that people had grievances. It wasn't the reason that people felt the need to have a revolution. But it did open the door of what was possible. It chipped away. It didn't break it. They broke it on the 25th, I think, but it really chipped away at the sense of helplessness that had taken hold over the previous decade plus in Egypt. So just seeing that it was possible really changed the game. But obviously, going back, you have so many bad elections. You have so many cases of rampant police brutality and corruption. The case of Khalid Said, the young man who was beaten to death in Alexandria in June 2010, and whose name became just this touchstone for the lawlessness and unchecked brutality and of the Interior Ministry under Mubarak. That was big. And I try to sort of mark out, here was a turning point, and here was a turning point. But I maintain that without Tunisia, maybe there would have eventually been some sort of revolution, but it does not happen like this, and it does not happen on this timeline without the Tunisians setting an example.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to just read quickly a passage from your book, the start of the first chapter, which is entitled The Accidental Dictator. I think this chapter quite amusingly and humorously tells sort of the story of that and the attitude from the beginning of the chapter.
Sure.
Of the attitude of the people and perhaps now what's in their minds as they face their current struggle against the SCAF and in.
This is